Howdy folks, it's Zach and welcome back to my channel. And today I just want to take a moment and recognize the life and death of Stan Lee. I know this is really out of character. Normally I just talk about video games, but bear with me for a second here because when I was growing up as a kid, I didn't have video games. You know, at the time there was Atari. That tells you a little bit about how old I am. And my dad didn't really approve of video games, so we didn't have them in the house. We were Mennonite, so we were pretty much on the technological back end of everything. But I was allowed to read as much fiction as I wanted. And so I had an adult library card. I could go to the library, pick up any book I wanted. So I was reading at a young age. I was reading Stephen King, which you don't really want to hand it over to some kid who's under 10, but I read it. You know, that was kind of the situation of things. But I was allowed to read as many comic books as I wanted. And right down the street from me was Beachhead Comics. And I was there, 3, 4, 5 times a week looking through comics. And this is at a time, too, when comic books were, 15, 25 cents. And by the time I was done with high school, they were about $1.25. So they weren't super unaffordable. At the time, you could get a lot of comic books for a really low price. And I was just reading all the time. And one of the great things about Stan Lee was that I think he educated a lot of us in what it means to write a good character. And the root of this, let's take Spider-Man. Spider-Man's really the example. he's I think the best, most universal example of this. So one of the things that's interesting about the way that Stan Lee would write is he focused, okay, what's a cool idea? Like, what's cool? First off, I just think that's a good idea. If you're writing, if you ever want to be a writer, if you're ever analyzing a piece of work or fiction, I don't think that's a bad place to start. In fact, I think that's one of the best places to start. Is this cool? Because that's going to keep your attention. That's one of the reasons why I think the Marvel movies are doing so well right now, because, hell, man, they're cool. Good stories. But what is it that makes them good stories? Well, let's take a look at Spider-Man really fast. Stan Lee was 40 years old when he created Spider-Man. And so a lot of what Stan Lee put into his characters were things that he faced and felt himself. And the elemental part of Spider-Man is that being Spider-Man and having all those spider powers in no way makes his life easier or better. In fact, all it does is bring even more challenges. And this kind of gets us to the root of writing good characters the Stan Lee way. How many problems can we give this character? How can we make this character fail? And then, what is this character having to sacrifice to get out of all of this? Unless you have these elements to overcome, your hero isn't really being all that heroic. If they can conquer any challenge without having to sacrifice anything, if they never have any problems, whether for themselves or interpersonally with other people, well, it's a really flat character. There's no real drama. And worse, there's nothing really to relate to. Because let me tell you, man, when I wake up in the morning, I feel like Peter Parker. I think we all have. Even if you're not some white guy from New York, who Peter Parker is, we relate to the problems. I wake up in the morning and, man, I'm worried about making rent at the end of the month. I wake up in the morning and anything that I do well, I'll take martial arts as an example. I've been doing martial arts since I was 18. I love it. But in no way does martial arts help me. Well, it indirectly can get the girl, but being Spider-Man, you can't advertise you're Spider-Man, and that doesn't help Peter Parker get the girl. Okay, in fact, that's probably what ends up helping him lose the girl and making the choice to have to not be with her. And it's usually what is causing him to wreck a moment, say with his Aunt May. His Aunt May maybe is behind on her rent. He needs to go to the bank, but oh no, wait, now this bad guy's attacking. Well, personal responsibility, I need to handle this problem, but by doing so, Aunt May lose her place. Okay? That level of human drama is something we all relate to because we've all been in those shoes. We have all had to make really tough choices and sacrifice things that we love in order to help out other people. That's what being heroic is really all about. That, and also, what problems do you face and what failures have you had that you've had to just get back up and walk away from and get over in order to keep going? That's heroic. We know this. And what's great though is that I feel like Stan Lee, though, put this in the front of our brains with characters like Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Avengers, and really honed that in. And now I really feel like there's a lot of modern day fiction, whether it's video games, comic books, movies, whether we realize it or not, that way of writing a character has influenced the way that we look at TV and film. And for a lot of us, for many years, that is the measuring stick by which we judge good characters or not. What problems do they face? What failures have they had? What do they need to overcome? A good example, Ripley out of Aliens. In my opinion, the finest example of a strong female character ever put into film. Love this character. And why is that, though? It's not because she walks onto the screen and can kill everything in sight, and does, shoots better than the boys, has this, mythological history with all the aliens and understands the way they think and is some superior hunter. It's not any of that. Man, she walks in, she has lost everything. Everything. She has lost her daughter. She has lost her job. She has lost her credibility. She has lost her respect. And she is trying to come over that. And on top of it, she's psychologically scarred by the things that she has seen and the death that she has encountered. And she doesn't want to go back into that. Are you nuts? What sane person would? But she does. And the characters that she meets, Newt and the Marines, she ends up caring for. And then it's these motherly instincts of looking to save Newt, looking to save herself, looking to save these Marines, looking to get out of this dangerous situation. She rises up above her failures, her problems, her fear, and, makes it through. It's all very heroic. She's such a badass in so many ways. And this is that essence of who she is and how she's written is exactly the same as what Stan Lee would influence us. This idea of taking a character like the Hulk, taking a character like Thor, taking characters like the X-Men, and saying, okay, look, great, you have some crazy good superpower, but how do we write you as a human being? How do we put Cyclops in a relationship with Jean Grey, or make them want to be in a relationship with each other, but have Cyclops so afraid that he might open his eyes at the wrong time and blow her head off, that it prevents him from dating her? And how do they work around this? How do you take characters, that come from every nation in the world, like Storm and Colossus and Nightcrawler and Banshee and Wolverine, Thunderbird, Cyclops, and put them all into one team? And what personality conflicts are we going to have here? And how do they still save the day at the end of it? It's seeing things like this that made relatable characters. And this is really the magic of who Stan Lee was because even if I didn't know what it felt like to be some Russian from the steppes of Europe, I could understand Colossus because I knew what it felt like to be in a place where nobody seemed to understand me. When I moved across the country with my family, we stopped being Mennonite, we moved across the country, and I went to a new middle school. And it was like coming to a different country, man. Pennsylvania and Arizona are nothing alike, let me tell you. And all of a sudden, you're in this place, and knowing what that felt like, made me relate to all these X-Men who came from all these different countries. Seeing Storm, one of my favorite Storm moments during the Chris Claremont era, she is captured with all the rest of the X-Men by Magneto. They're put into these chairs. And these chairs rewire their nervous system so that they basically have the motor functions of babies, really, like really, really young toddlers. They can't speak. They can't really control what it is that they're doing. And Storm summons up the willpower because at that age she had learned to be a thief already. She summons up the willpower to knock her tiara off, grab a toothpick, a lockpick with her mouth, and start working the lock of one of her manacles with that toothpick using only her teeth and the lockpick. It's amazing. But then at the last second, right as she's about to succeed, she fails. And in that moment, the Guardian who's watching over them, Nanny Bot, comes over, sees that her tiara is knocked off, and puts it back on her head. She has to do the whole thing over again. And in that moment, she cries. And I just remember, my heart went out to that character. And this is classic Stan Lee type of writing. And we're seeing it through Chris Claremont. We're seeing it through the whole Marvel era of writers who came next, at least up until the anti-hero movement started picking up in the 80s. But this idea that we as people, we fail all the time. If we see the characters that we love fail as well, we will be endeared to them. Because we will see that as they overcome it, maybe in our own lives, we can overcome it too. And that was Stan Lee. Stan Lee at 40 years old is when he started writing Spider-Man. Not in his 20s. You know, this idea that most times we have about how our life is going to go, that's not how Stan Lee's life went. You know, he'd been a writer in the army. You know, he had done these other things. And then by the time he was 40 years old in comic books, how weird is that that's when your life actually picks up and starts? He knew as I think this is what gives him such an edge over a lot of the writers that we have at Marvel today, where they just hire somebody off of Twitter. You know, they'll say, oh, hey, you're a Latina lesbian. You know, in real life, let's have you write America, who's a Latina lesbian. Okay, great. You know, you're 20 years old, and Latina lesbian, she's a 20-year-old Latina lesbian. That must work. No. What we see with Stan Lee was that it was his life experience that taught him what's universally relatable as part of humanity. Okay? Let's not try to write a character who's just a symbol. Let's take Captain America and bust him down as what is he really? He is a man out of place, out of time, feeling out of touch with the people around him. And yet, he rises above it to do heroic things. Who has to be humble himself to realize, maybe I don't know everything, and I still need to learn. But maybe I also still have something to teach. You know, when you look at Spider-Man, who is probably my favorite, one of my favorite Marvel characters of all time. I think I could probably just do an essay just on Spider-Man. Let me actually not use Spider-Man for a second. Let me go to the West Coast Avengers. When you look at guys like Ant-Man, or you know, Hank Pym as he was in the West Coast Avengers, who in one of my favorite issues of all time, he has to fight all the West Coast Avengers to try to save the life of his first wife, you know, and to try to rescue her. And you know, as I'm watching this, as you know, this scientist who's just in a red jumpsuit, I didn't know Hank Pym was also Ant-Man until the end of the book. I was like, who is this guy, Hank Pym? I don't get it. You know what? He pulls things out of his pockets and grows them. Okay, that's kind of cool, I guess. I don't know how he's gonna get the best of some of these other guys. You know, and he confronts Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, Vision, you know, Mockingbird, and one by one, he basically, you know, faces them and beats them. You know, to get to the end. And I just remember thinking, like, man, who is this guy? You know, I mean, he's taking a licking, but he's dishing it out. He's overcoming these challenges, and then you find out, or at least I found out at the end of the issue, that the woman he's trying to rescue was his first wife, who he felt he had failed. And that he was going to quit the Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, to try to help her in her situation, because she had mutated, you know, beyond just being a normal human. And I just remember reading that, just going like, man, wow, that's a hero. That is a hero. That is a guy who says, okay, I want to be a superhero. I want to be recognized for the things that I can do. However, I'm going to give that up because this person needs me right now. This is the person who, you know, this is the person who matters. And so I'm going to give it up to do this for them. That was amazing. Amazing. That's hero stuff, man. That's Stan Lee. So anyway, guys, I've ranted on for way too long at this point. But if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And in the comments area below, tell me what your favorite Stan Lee inspired story was of the Stan Lee era. Tell me who your favorite Stan Lee character was. You know, I know mine's Spider-Man. You know, for sure. You know, let me know what you think. Use this as a chance to decompress. If you guys have never been to my channel before, mostly I stick to video games and talking about video games and you know, analyzing news events and the video games themselves. But I don't think any of that is really possible unless I somehow also talked about Stan Lee on a day like today. Because I don't think there's a kid like myself who grew up anytime, you know, from 1960 something until today, who did not get into TV and film or did not get into video games, who was not influenced by a comic book Stan Lee had his hands on. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't think there's a fiction writer out there, a movie reviewer, a movie maker who did not know on some level something about Stan Lee's work. Maybe they didn't read the comic book, but they knew probably who Spider-Man was. They probably knew who the Hulk was. On some level, we've all been touched by this man's work, and so I just wanted to take an opportunity to recognize that today. Anyway, guys, please like and subscribe, and instead of using my normal outing phrase, which is just to say we'll see you next time, I'm going to use Stan Lee's. Excelsior.